Well, we are at the halfway mark with the number of registrations of people who have actually been able to sign on. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's special presentation hosted by the Bottom Line Partners, a 25-year business alliance between Mahoney & Associates, Holland & Knight, Diversified Search, and Right Management. But before we get started, please take a moment to make sure your microphone is muted and there's no background disruptions. We want to also mention that we'll be using the chat box feature exclusively for our Q&A session later today. So towards the end of our presentation, there'll be a defined period of time dedicated to your questions and allowing us to respond accordingly. So please submit your questions directly to the chat box feature. We're also asking everyone to please refrain from submitting unrelated comments directly to the chat box feature so they don't get confused with the questions. Hey, my name is Deborah Shelton, and I am the Executive Vice President of C-Suite Services for Right Management, Florida Caribbean. We are delighted that you've joined us for this important and continuing conversation on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Back in late August, we facilitated our first ever virtual Bottom Line event, a candid conversation about race in the workplace, featuring Dale Jones, the CEO of Diversified Search, and moderated by Erika Royal from Holland & Knight. Today, we are taking a leap forward by introducing a panel of 3 highly experienced Florida-based CHROs, reflecting on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They'll describe the hurdles they have encountered, share the advances their organizations have made and continue to make, and outline their hopes and plans for the future. It is now my pleasure to introduce our esteemed moderator and panelists. Erika Royal is returning as our guest moderator and is a partner in Holland & Knight's labor and employment practice. She joined the firm after graduating from Harvard Law School in 1998. She's been repeatedly recognized by the Florida Super Lawyers magazine and the Best Lawyers in America guide, and was twice named Fort Lauderdale's Labor and Employment Lawyer of the Year. Margie Vargas serves as the Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer of Memorial Healthcare System, a nationally recognized nonprofit hospital system here in South Florida, employing over 14,000 diverse caregivers throughout 6 hospitals and numerous outpatient care centers. She joined Memorial over 20 years ago, growing through the ranks, and now leads a high-performing HR leadership team responsible for the day-to-day people strategies and operations. Donna Kimmel is the Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer of Citrix, having joined the organization in 2015. She's a trusted human resource leader who believes in a culture that creates diverse and engaged teams that enable the extraordinary. Throughout her career, she's delivered comprehensive people programs, led large-scale end-to-end business initiatives, and catalyzed cultural transformations. Since 2016, Terry Arnold has served as a CHRO at Southern Glazer Wine and Spirits, the largest private wine and spirits distributor in the U.S. with operations in 44 states. In his role, he is responsible for providing leadership for all human resource initiatives in support of the overall business and strategic objectives. Terry is also a military veteran, having served 8 years in the U.S. Army and is a proud Army Ranger. Terry, thank you for your service. Erika, we now turn to you to lead this important discussion with our subject matter experts, Margie, Donna, and Terry. Take it away, Erika.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Deborah. I appreciate it. So before we get started, and that was a great introduction, by the way, I was really into it. I'm a little bit discombobulated right now. Before we get started, I just wanted to say that for me, coming to this conversation, I've been practicing at my firm for 22 years as an employment lawyer. And over that time, our conversations that would touch on this subject have changed from being really compliance-based, which I think is what we were doing when I started, to coming in and teaching about workplace culture, which is a little bit more warm and fuzzy than compliance, and where we are now, which is really about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that it is important to the people who are attending today, just to get an idea from our speakers, kind of where they're coming from. So I know we heard your bios, but maybe you could give us, just 2 or 3 minutes on who you actually are, what your background is, and kind of what you're seeing high level at your organizations. Margie, can we start with you?
Sure. I want to thank Right Management and Maureen Shea and her team for certainly extending the invitation for me to join this conversation. I replied back within milliseconds because I think it's such a critical conversation, not just for employers I think just as mankind, as humanity, I think that in order to move society forward, regardless of the color of your skin, where you come from, and political affiliation, at the end of the day, it's about humanity. So I think it's really important that we have the conversation, especially when we are uncomfortable. So on a personal note, as you know, I am Hispanic. I am a woman. I am the oldest of 3 grown children that has been responsible for the well-being of my parents. So as head of household, I find that, you know, disparities in healthcare, disparities in society, you know, those are things that I have lived with and have seen and have experienced, and have seen my brothers and sisters in the Black American community certainly be the victims of many behaviors that are just uncivilized, for lack of a better word. I think that I find that this conversation is just critical for me personally and professionally, as the head of HR for 14,000 caregivers in South Florida. I take the responsibility, you know, very seriously. So I want to impart to 14,000 warriors that take care of our community, my children, my family, my friends, my colleagues, that, you know, what I say is my bond, and my bond is that this is important. This is life or death, that we have these conversations. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Margie. Donna, how about you?
Sure. It's, again, thank you as well for inviting me to partake in this session. It's an honor to be here with all of you and sharing this dialogue. You know, I think I can echo much of what Margie and Erika just really talked about, because for me, a lot of this really comes down to the humanity and the fact that people matter. People are what make our organizations successful. And it is through understanding who we are, what we bring to the table, that's so important to me in this, you know, in this arena. Having been in the human resources field for, you know, almost 35 years, I've also experienced the change, as Erika talked about, that migration of how we talked about differences in the workplace, all the way through where we are today. And I think where we have landed here in terms of our opportunity to truly open up the dialogue that really needs to be there, to understand what each and every one of us brings to the workplace, to enable us to collectively, you know, drive the success of our organizations matter. You know, Citrix has about 9,000 employees around the world. And so from a global perspective, our global differences are very important to us, but so are the ones that are rooted here, you know, in the US as well. So again, I think overarching, it is about people. It's what people bring to the workplace. And I am excited to be part of helping to bring these conversations alive in our organization, so that we can truly drive the kind of change that's going to be beneficial, not only to our companies, but to society as a whole. Thank
you, Donna. Terry, what about you?
All right. Hey, I'll start with the saying that I was reared with, which every day before I went out to school, which is today is a great day to learn something new. I'm Terry Arnold. I'm a product of Jacksonville, Florida. I'm number 4 of 5 kids to my single parent mom, being brought up in the inner city of Jacksonville. Went off to university at Florida A&M University, a proud historically Black college and university in North Florida. And for the past 30 years or so, I've been working with people, high-performing teams, literally all around the globe. My career began as a second lieutenant Army officer, fresh out of the Army's best training, at least in my opinion, as an Army Ranger, that took me to 4 combat tours and every place in between, from Macedonia, Afghanistan, to my last mission, which was in Haiti. And then I joined the ranks of General Electric for 16 years before having the opportunity to come back home for the first time to the great state of Florida here just 4 years ago. When we talk about Southern Glazers, as the world's preeminent distributor of beverage alcohol with our over 20,000 employees, our CEO and our senior leaders, we recognize that our people are our most valuable resource. And we recognize this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion as one that must be embraced, one that is tough and that has been tough. And now that we have to get real and take some bold approaches, which I'm comfortable that we're doing to put an end and to bring more awareness, learning, and education to the topics at hand around social injustice, around the racial animus, and around allowing folks to truly come to work as their best selves, regardless of the communities that they come from. And so looking forward to partnering up with Margie and Donna. And again, can't thank Maureen and Right Management enough for the invite.
Thank you. So one of the things that really struck me in the video that we just watched was the statistics that Mr. Taylor was using, and he was showing that people are experiencing the workplace very differently. And I think that that was a very good way to show that, because I think a lot of times that's missed. A lot of times in our day-to-day life, we think everybody's having the same experience we're having. And in fact, people are not. And so I know that I touched a little bit on the difference in the way that the training that I've been doing has evolved over time, but I'd be curious to know what kind of employee training have your organizations committed to that are bringing awareness to the DEI initiatives in the workplace? And let's start with Donna on that one.
Sure. You know, and we step back and think about the development that we're doing. We really focus on the areas of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And we've chosen those words very purposely for us because diversity is all about our differences. Differences are really what is critical to enabling a successful organization. Inclusion for us is also about being invited in. And then belonging is about an emotion. It's a sense, do I feel like I belong here? Have I been invited in? Am I embraced for my differences? And that's woven through all of the development that we do. We want to make sure that diversity as well is seen in a very broad capacity. And when we think about the breadth of diversity, it is about welcoming all of our differences, and those differences is what makes us stronger. It is about race, it is about ethnicity, it is about gender differences, sexual orientation and transgender, religious differences, mental health and disabilities that people struggle with. It's differences of thought and life experiences and upbringing and perspectives. And that, again, becomes the fabric of who we are. That's woven into some of our unconscious bias training. And one of the things that we did recently, we had offered it on a voluntary basis, but we now have every single employee taking that training. And it has enabled us to truly start the dialogue within our organization and down at the team level. We've also, through our learning platform, spent time making sure that we're developing training that's building and leading diverse and inclusive teams and creating psychological safety. What does that mean? And that really gets to building a strong culture and building a strong culture of anti-racist behaviors. It also ties for us to allies and the creation of allies in the organization, because what we need are people who come to the table who want to learn more. And one of the things that we focused on back in June, we started a series called Daring Dialogues, where the entire company is invited. And we had tremendous participation, about 2,500 or so participants around the world. And when we looked at the statistics, literally up in the upper 90s% people were paying attention, not dropping off, not doing emails, not doing other things. They were completely compelled by the conversation. And it was our colleagues talking from a very human perspective, sharing their personal stories, what it was like for our Black colleagues, in this case, to be growing up Black. What does it mean as to how it translates into their experiences in the workplace? Our ELT also shared commitments. But our ongoing Daring Dialogues are featuring external speakers, such as we've got next week coming in, later this week actually, the Dean of the Business Boston University Law School is going to talk with us about equality and equitable workplaces and the law. So a number of things that we've been trying to do to embed culture differences ensure allyship, inclusion as a part of our development.
Sounds great. Thank you, Donna. Terry, what are they doing in your company?
Yeah, we took a three-pronged approach in our regard. We first prong being engagement. That was really educating and partnering with our managers and our leaders, coaching them through their roles, their responsibility as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The second part was all things training and development. We recognized that we had to enhance, even upgrade, and even delete some of our training out there in our Southern Glazers University sphere to make sure that it was current and relevant. And it started with some of the basics when we talk about the education and training, which was defining, as Donna so mentioned, defining the terms in which we're talking about. What is the definition of diversity? What is the definition of inclusion? We talk about equity, we talk about belonging. Are we all starting from the same place with defining those words that we use? We even expanded to talk about intersectionality and unconscious bias. But our training was set up to where we wanted everyone to start from the same platform so that we can then build on it. And the third prong of that is we focused on the volunteers, what we refer to as our volunteers, our volunteer effort externally, to say that, in partnerships with the community. And those are some things that we're doing. We'll talk about a bit more with Thurgood Marshall College Fund, some things we're doing with the Black Hospitality Initiative, some things that we're doing with EverFi, partnerships with Florida A&M University and other historically Black colleges and universities, and also with Florida International University from a Hispanic serving institution and University of Florida. Those two being the number 2 and the number 8 in the country, and then supplier partnerships as well. So our three-pronged approach hit first with our leaders, and then collectively with our employees, and then we went out to the community.
Okay, and Margie, I would imagine that Memorial has quite a stake in all of this too. Maybe you could tell us what Memorial's doing.
Sure. So similar to what Terry and Donna have shared, in that, we've looked at leadership. What have we facilitated that we need to refresh, that we need to go back and have refreshers? We've had some guest speakers that are well known, such as Christine Perath, who is a professor at Georgetown, who has done training for about 1,300 leaders and middle managers on civility in the workplace, and truly just defining, what does respect look like? How does that show up? Not only respect towards each other as colleagues, but certainly respect with our patients and our families and the community. We've also engaged other speakers such as Paul Mashenko and Dr. Helen Holton on having the difficult conversations and role playing through live sessions. What does those conversations look like? And we have received positive feedback and not so positive feedback. And we've owned that positive feedback, which is, we do have a number of a contingency that says, I'm uncomfortable having this conversation. Why do we have to do it here? It doesn't belong here. So similar to what Johnny Taylor's comments were, we have some generational, I don't want to call them barriers, but certainly some hurdles to jump over and to get past. Making it safe, making it a safe space to have those conversations. So, we're looking at training that we facilitated in the past, because that's not working. Unconscious bias, that was a voluntary training. It's not voluntary anymore. It's mandatory. It's part of, the core curriculum, core knowledge building that we want to create at the organization. Looking at how we hire, how do we hire and how do we train hiring managers? So, hiring managers, we all have biases, whether we want to acknowledge them or not. So how does that play out in the recruitment process? So it's sharing our numbers, but more importantly, what are we going to do? So that's the conversation that we're having right now. We're also asking our line staff, how do they want to receive the information? So it's not just relying on WebExes. How are we going to socially distance and keep everyone safe and still facilitate, classroom conversation and role playing. Everybody learns differently. So we're trying to figure that out as well. How can we have different ways of having the conversation that needs to be had?
Wonderful. So one thing that I know I've personally noticed is that I guess because people were stuck in their homes and had the opportunity to really focus, there was a lot of urgency around this topic in the summer, in late May, June, into July, I would say. And then over time, it's kind of becoming, like just another thing that happened. And so I'm wondering, with respect to your diversity initiatives, what kind of metrics are you using? What kind of accountability measures are you employing to make sure that, this is all more than just a great sounding conversation? Terry, let's start with you.
Yeah, I love the question. To make sure it's not a moment in time or not a transaction. Couldn't agree with you more. And that's been the impetus of basically how we preface everything is look, these are now behaviors that every leader, from a leadership essential aspect, must demonstrate, role model, and has to be a part of their organic DNA in order to be successful as it aligns with our Southern Glazers family values. Period, point blank. Our CEO, Wayne Chaplin, our senior leader, Lee Hager, have made that very clear to all of our leaders. And look, it was a very easy message to receive for our employees as well as our leaders. But being able to demonstrate these leadership essentials is just imperative for how we now have to operate. Some of the behaviors that got us to our success organizationally and individually are not necessarily the same behaviors that will get us to our future success. And talking about these topics, we recognize that we also have to make enhancements in what we expect of our leaders. And so we've made it an imperative. And if you want to say edict, that's probably a strong word, but our CEO is leading by example. Lee Hager is leading by example, and all of us as leaders in the organization and employees alike are following to understand that this is not a moment. This is truly a movement. And in order for us to progress and be successful and matriculate in our careers, be it you're an individual contributor today, or you aspire to be a manager, a people manager, or manager of managers, or leader of leaders, these are skills that you must demonstrate in consideration for those advanced opportunities.
Okay. Donna, what about at Citrix?
Sure. The metrics piece I think is really important, and I couldn't agree more. This is a continuous journey. It's not an event in time. And I think all too often we as human beings sort of fall back in the event in time. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that the journey continues. We started about 4.5 years ago, really building out our diversity, inclusion, and belonging strategies and practices. And while I believe that we've made some phenomenal strides in doing that within the organization, we recognize that we have more to do. And we've got a nice clear roadmap that we've built out for the next year that continues to design new programs and practices that we're holding ourselves accountable to. We have a consultant that's coming in, Black Tech Jobs, that's going to be working with us to sort of dig into our own practices, our own processes, to see might there be some things that are going on that unintentionally are problematic for us. And again, this roadmap was really designed with our Black Professional Network and our other employee resource groups. A couple of things I think from a metrics perspective that are really important to us. One, we know that accountability matters, and our executive leadership team under David Henschel, our CEO, we have decided to move forward with increasing our transparency publicly. We already have a fair amount of information out on our website right now about our diversity practices and sort of what we look like. But we want to continue that transparency, and we are in the process of working on creating a set of goals for ourselves that will enable us to tie compensation to that. So we're going to be looking at representation, diversity representation. We're going to look at our engagement, inclusion, and our pay equity. And it's going to be tied into our short-term incentives and then it'll be part of what we report in our proxy. So we're really putting some teeth into it, and we're really proud to be able to do that. I think the other thing from a metrics perspective is we really do try to peel the onion as much as possible in terms of cutting our data as much as we can to truly understand what's going on. And I'll give an example. We can look at turnover, we can look at promotions and succession development, we can look at engagement. We have very, very strong, as an example, we have very strong perceptions around diversity within our organization from an engagement perspective. But as we look at those scores, which are well into the 90s, when we look at those scores and we peel it back by underrepresented groups and gender differences, we may see a 5 to 8 percentage point difference. And that enables us to really, again, peel back that onion and look at, okay, it's great that we have very high scores. What's it going to take to make sure that our underrepresented groups and gender differences enable their scores to be as strong as the broader part of the organization. So we really do try to not look at a broad brush. We really try to dig in to understand what's going on in each of our groups and hold ourselves accountable for taking next step actions.
Okay, sounds very extensive. Margie, how would you answer that question?
Sure. So we are very early on in our journey. We have a commitment from the president, from executive staff across the enterprise, and we're in the process of that commitment has translated into resources that we have not had before. So having a diversity, equity, and inclusion team, having a subject matter expert that we're recruiting for one now that clearly can help navigate the organization. But I think it's important to have skin in the game. So, you know, Donna, I'm definitely going to reach out to you in the next couple months to kind of understand a little bit more about your journey. But I think accountability and skin in the game is important. So, you know, how we do that is looking at our balanced scorecards. All of our leaders have balanced scorecards that are that is how we measure performance. That is how we drive the organization forward based on the 7 pillars of excellence of this organization. And I think it's important that we build into that some measure to recognize and to give it importance, that this is not the flavor of the day. And we tend to do that. So I will say in healthcare, you know, if we have an adverse outcome, if we have a patient event, if we have a safety risk issue, you know, we attack it, we do a root cause analysis, we believe that we solve it and we mitigate and put things around it so that it doesn't happen again. And it's very clear that, you know, the conversation that we're having today at Memorial is that this is not it. You know, this is not a risk that we can mitigate by putting in a policy in place that has, you know, 15 bullet points and sub-bullet points. This is about having a conversation and educating ourselves so that we can truly understand what this means. But leader accountability is something that the president asked for almost immediately. He said, these are the resources that you asked for. Here they are, but I want to know how we're going to move forward leadership in this organization so that everyone has a commitment. So that's where we're strategizing today. One thing that we have already implemented is that our employee engagement survey, we had discussions about introducing diversity, equity, inclusion into that survey so that we can have a pulse on what our employees are thinking and feeling and how they can rate this particular area that's important to them and to us. So that is something that we're going to be implementing very shortly.
Thank you. And I love that you mentioned that you're going to reach out to Donna for information, because quite frankly, you know, this is why we do these, is so that we can get this information out to all the people in HR who are looking for ideas and looking for, you know, changes they can make at their companies. So I think it's great that we're having exchanges of ideas on the panel. And I think it's wonderful if anybody takes anything away from this today, you know, we are just here to help. So one thing that really struck me in the opening comments by Johnny Taylor was when he said that there are 5 generations in the workplace. And, you know, I work at a very large law firm, and there are certainly 5 generations in my workplace. And I do think that the breadth of difference across those 5 generations sometimes feels a little greater than others. And with respect to the topic of discussing race at work, absolutely. Law firms are pretty conservative, and so not really leading the charge on things like this. But I think it's great that we have on the panel industries where you guys are really going to have no choice but to be at the front of this. And so I'm wondering, with regard to the comment that so many people think that discussing race at work is just not appropriate. 1, do you see that as an obstacle? And 2, how are you managing around this disconnect, Donna?
Yeah, this to me is one of those subjects that is really critical to my heart. And I think you heard it from most of the panelists during the introduction. We have all lived through different times in the journey of our careers and have experienced different ways that diversity has been talked about in organizations. And while I love the fact that when you think about diversity, you think about it in and act with it in a very broad capacity. Because it is truly about all the differences that each and every one of us bring to the workplace is part of the fabric of again, who we are. And we want employees to feel like they can be themselves in the workplace. So those differences are really, really critical. But I think what has happened over the years, and this was generally, sort of taught in organizations, was that the tougher the conversations got, the more you could avoid them. And when we talk about all the differences that are potentially there, it gave companies an opportunity to hide behind all those differences and just talk about the ones that were easy to talk about, which were generational differences or thought differences or upbringing differences, education, and not talk about the things that were really at the root. And so from my perspective, I love the transition that's happening. I love the transition that the newer generations are bringing to the workplace, are pushing, because that enables us to do what we need to, which is really talk about those tough situations, because through those conversations, through those dialogues, that's going to enable us to break through as an organization. And again, as Margie and Terry talked, it is about enabling our managers and our employees to have those productive dialogues with each other about the tough subjects that are really going to break down those walls to enable us to help try to create some healing and momentum for doing things differently in our organizations.
Margie, what about you?
It's interesting because there's such discomfort about getting it wrong. So I find that at least, as I'm rounding in the hospitals with my N95 mask and my face shield, and we're having conversations in the hallways or what have you, more than not, people want to have a conversation. They're just afraid of saying the wrong thing. They're afraid of hurting someone's feelings. They're afraid of, I had a leader say to me, I want to have this conversation, but what if I upset someone because they don't want to talk about it because they've been through so much. So it just goes back to providing that guidance and emulating. And I've heard that before, role modeling and emulating. And so what we've done as a quick strategy, just in brainstorming, we have recruited some very highly respected individuals in the organization that are willing to have those conversations. So physician leaders, our pediatric leader of pediatric transplant, cardiac transplant, having a conversation with one of, a Black surgeon and having the conversation where the Black surgeon said, you didn't even ask me how I was feeling. And the chief saying, I didn't know what to say. And receiving the message that it's okay not to know what to say, but I expected you to check on me as a human being. So part of our strategy is having real conversations that don't feel scripted, rehearsed, videotaping folks, and then uploading those videos for our staff to see 24/7, providing that to leaders as well. That the biggest mistake is not having a conversation. Because if you make a mistake during a conversation, you just say, I'm sorry that came across that way, but this is what I meant to say. This is what I meant to ask. So recruiting leaders that are respected, recruiting middle managers that are respected, the unofficial leaders on the units, we all have those. They don't have the word supervisor in their title, but they are a leader amongst the rank and file, right? And they have a lot of persuasion and influence, recruiting folks that are willing to be courageous and have that conversation. That is working well for us right now, very organic. It's just evolving.
Love it. So, you know, I am firmly Generation X. And I will say that I came into the workplace thinking that you should not talk about race and politics and religion and all that. But I will tell you that as a Black woman, workplace conversations about race were happening. They just weren't happening for everyone. So this idea that people weren't talking about race at work is, you know, a little bit erroneous. There were a bunch of us who were talking about it the whole time because it was something that we were experiencing in real time. And so I think what the real difference is now is that other people have been welcomed to the conversation. And I liked your comments about people being afraid of getting it wrong, because I think it's really important for everyone to know, particularly anyone who's thinking about making a statement or taking a stand or being more vocal. Everyone is afraid of getting it wrong. You know, I am a person who clearly talks a lot, and I am still afraid of getting it wrong. And I don't think that just because I'm a Black woman, everything I say is going to be completely correct. And so one of the things that that I liked about our opening video was that Johnny Taylor pointed out, he really is not an expert just by virtue of his lived experience. And there are many people who feel like they are, and, you know, more power to them. I didn't necessarily feel like an expert based on my lived experience either. And so when all of this became such a hot topic, I started reading a lot of books, because I found, and this is a pro tip, a lot of times it's easier to have these conversations if you can rely on what some really smart author has said or what some really great speaker has said, instead of putting yourself out there and being vulnerable by always talking about your own experience, because this is tough stuff for people and they're a little resistant. And if you put yourself out there and people push back, it feels personal. When you start talking about, Donna mentioned anti-racism, when you start talking about the work of like Ibram X. Kendi and his book, How to Be Anti-Racist, it takes you out of the equation a little bit, and you can talk more about that book and what he meant. So that's one of the ones that I read, which was excellent. Another one that I would highly recommend to anybody who's even thinking they might want to read a book about this subject is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo, who, it's such a great book. And if you have the opportunity to listen to it on Audible, it's even better. It makes so much of these topics so much more accessible, and it can allow you to educate yourself in a way that doesn't involve judgment. So I'm wondering if anybody else on the panel has any other websites or tools, books, speakers that they would recommend to this group who, if they're interested in learning anything more or bringing somebody in to present. And Terry, we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'll say, well, once your direct question, yeah, I mean, there are a couple of books that came out, right? White Fragility by Robin DeAngelis, Cast by Isabel Wilkinson. And then there are a couple of titles, you know, we can't talk about that at work, and I forget who the author is. And I'm a runner, and so I've listened to both of them on Audible. And then because they're so profound, I actually had to go back and read them just because the left side of my brain, it has to stick sometimes. Just to answer the first part of your question, I like to piggyback though off of Margie and Donna on just bringing the generations together and share with you something that we're doing here at Southern Glazers with our diversity and inclusion team. And, you know, it's been 176 days since the passing, the brutal death of George Floyd. And it's 2020. Just when you put that into perspective, 176 days, we're in the year of 2020. When you look at collectively what all is happening and what all continues to happen generationally and systemically, we're talking about that to all of our generations. In our workforce, roughly about 41% are millennials, about 36% are Gen X, like me, Erika. So I shared that with you. And believe this or not, our fastest population, Gen Z, which is 5% of our workforce, is also a part of that. And 18% make up our baby boomers, and we have about 2% from the greatest generation. I say all that to say, we launched in June 8th what we call Courageous Conversations. And these are listening sessions with our employees. And to date, we've had over 10,000 employees and managers attend these Courageous Conversations. Where folks have listened, they're there to understand, they're there to learn, they're there to get educated, and they're there to bring awareness to all the things that are going on, from the political climate to the social climate to the racial climate to everything that's ongoing. And we refer to, Johnny said something and you sparked my thoughts, Erika. Johnny said, these are hot topics, and these for us, they've been hot topics, meaning they've been humble, they've been open, they've been transparent dialogues, and we've covered the gamut. We've talked about Amy Cooper and Kristen Cooper from New York Central Park. We've talked about Ahmaud Arbery. We've talked about George Floyd, as you can imagine. We've talked about Breonna Taylor and many, many other things that our generations, like you shared, have not necessarily talked about collectively. We may have talked about them in a section or in a segment or in a certain populace, but not necessarily collectively. And so there is a lot of learning that's ongoing with our Courageous Conversations. And a lot of that learning is a lot of the book titles I shared with you. To your direct question, is where we've gotten a lot of those book titles from, with White Fragility and with Cast by Isabel Wilkinson. And look at some deep reading. If you're one that gets your feelings hurt easily, don't pick up either one of those books, because they will in the hot topic aspect, they will humble you, and they're very open and they're very transparent. Thanks for letting me add.
Excellent. So I want to make sure we get through our questions, and I'm already getting told about time. So I want to be mindful of the fact that we still have to leave time for questions. One thing that I'm wondering is how your organizations, how they have managed the debate, in quotes, between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter in the workplace. I know that depending on who you ask, Black Lives Matter is, peaceful protesters or social justice or terrorist organization. So I think it's super important that people are educated, right, before they start offering opinions about how we should do something. But I'm wondering how you guys are dealing with, first of all, defining Black Lives Matter in the workplace, and then also how you manage that inevitable debate if you have more than, say, 10 people in a room between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Margie, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. Right off the bat, our CEO, Aurelio Fernandez, asked, how do I respond to this? I called him on the weekend and I said, look, a couple of days have passed. Your voice needs to be heard. Let's talk about this. And, I asked him, what are your feelings? And of course, saddened and just a host of emotions. And he asked the same question. He goes, what is your position? And I said, I don't want to marginalize one group to be able to have a broad conversation. We need to talk about Black Lives Matter. Let's not marginalize what is taking place here in a group of individuals in this country and in our society. And so we've been very firm from the get-go that at the end of the day, we know that discrimination takes place and it takes place in a number of forms and towards many groups, right? I think we can agree on that. But the bottom line is that this conversation needs to be had, and we're going to focus. We're going to focus on this conversation. And so right off the bat, he said that, and then that trickled down through leadership, and we have held firm to that discrimination taking place in other groups that's important, and we don't condone any of it. But today we're going to have this conversation. And I think it was respected. It was definitely respected from the beginning, and we've handled a lot of those one-on-one discussions to say, you know, we believe that everything is important, but today this is the conversation that we're having. One book I do want to mention, because I purchased this for my older daughters as well, is that and I wrote this down. I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown. I'm a Brene Brown fanatic. And I heard her speak for a whole hour, and then I bought the book and then purchased that book for my daughters as well. I think it's a much lighter read than White Fragility, but nonetheless it has incredible stories that help to paint the picture as to what is happening, what has happened to her, and so that was pretty impactful for my family. So just sharing that with you.
Thank you. Donna, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, for us, same thing. And I think it comes back to the fear of making mistakes and our ability, like, you know, what Margie and Terry are talking about is it's really about freeing the space, creating the space to make those mistakes to enable the dialogue. And it's about a growth mindset. For us, we know that all lives do matter. It is about people. And that is the foundation. But we also knew that in this moment, it was really important for us to honor Black Lives Matter. And the head of our Black professionals in our first Daring Dialogue addressed this question directly, and really gave a neat analogy that I think became very meaningful for our listeners, because it's not doing this at the exclusion of anything else. It's not doing this at the exclusion of all of the other populations that make up who we are. But she talked about it in a way of a neighborhood. And in this neighborhood, there's, you know, a lot of houses, and a lot of houses may have a lot of different issues and challenges and things that need to be fixed. But there's one house that's burning right now. It's on fire. And we need to make sure that we are focused. We have focused attention on that particular house. And I think that part of that analogy helped everybody sort of think about that, yes, the whole neighborhood is important, but we have a focus area right now. And for us, growth mindset and looking at the opportunity to learn from the mistakes that we're making, learn from the dialogues that we're having, is really important to us, because whatever we are doing now that's really focused on anti-racism, that's really focused on Black Lives Matter, are things that we can learn and apply to all lives matter, that apply to all of our underrepresented groups. And so even though there is a direct focus that's happening right now to put the difficult conversations on the table, we're learning through it. And we're learning skills that are going to enable us to do it throughout other parts of the organization. So it's really not being done with any disrespect or any insult to any of the other populations. And so for us, that is really how we have spoken about it. And I think what's also linked to that growth mindset is the power of allyship. You know, after we started doing these Daring Dialogues, we had many employees, and I apologize that I don't have the exact statistics, but we had a lot of employees join the Black Professional Network to become allies to that group so that they could really participate in more of the dialogues that are happening at the small group level, in addition to the large group level, so that they could ask, so that they could learn, they could hear more of the stories, they could hear the struggles. And that's been incredibly powerful lesson for us as we look across the organization. I'll just say, put in a plug for the same resources. I have all those books. They're incredibly helpful and great resources. I think one of the other things that our teams have focused on is 13th, the documentary 13th. That became an opportunity for a group of employees to come together to talk about what that meant. There was also an HBR article that was shared called Dear White Boss. It was from the Harvard Business Review back in 2002. And again, powerful conversation back then being brought to the forefront of our dialogues. And then another thing that our Black professionals have brought in terms of their smaller dialogues is something called table talk, which are basically opportunities for family conversations, right? Taking things that you can talk about with your family around the table and talk about them in the workplace and have that conversation. They're put on by the Anti-Defamation League. So some other great resources that I think would be very powerful for our listeners and participants.
Thank you. Terry, do you have anything to add?
I most certainly do. Yeah, look, to me, and to a lot of folks that look like me, Black Lives Matter is a statement of focus. It is not a statement of exclusion. And as a Black man, I'm 6'3", 215 pounds. I have literally lived across the globe. And I can tell you, in all of my domestic living, I have been stopped in every neighborhood that I've lived in as an adult, less than 2 miles from my home, for no other reason than I look the way I look, or I'm driving a vehicle that was out of sorts. From Weston, which is where I live today, a year ago when I purchased a new electric car, officer stopped me and simply said, "Oh, wanted to stop you because when people like you drive these cars, you often don't have insurance." And that's in Weston, Florida, 2019. Or when I lived in Dunwoody, Georgia, lived in Highland Village, Texas, or Seattle, Washington. So when we say Black Lives Matter, it's a statement of focus. It's not a statement of exclusion. No different than how we would say moms against drunk driving. It doesn't mean that there aren't fathers that are against drunk driving. I'm a runner. I just ran an event a couple of months ago, the Susan G. Komen breast cancer run. It doesn't mean that Susan G. Komen does not care about other cancers. The focus is on breast cancer. It doesn't mean that colon cancer is not important, or prostate cancer is not important. So when we say Black Lives Matter and we talk about the education that has to occur, Black Lives Matter is a statement of focus. It is not a statement of exclusion. And by no means whatever should it ever be compared with. And this is coming from someone with a lot of experience militaristically and who have truly fought insurgents in terroristic organizations. It's no Antifa, it's no Proud Boys, it is no Boogaloo. Black Lives Matter is a group that wants you to focus on, hey, why is this systemically happening to people of Black and brown persuasion at a rate that is 10-to-1 in some aspects, 5-to-1 in other aspects, and 2-to-1 in most aspects, from a community aspect. So that's what Black Lives Matter is. It is a statement of focus, and it is not a statement of exclusion. We want folks to know, to say, hey, to the example Donna shared, to what Margie shared, that's what Black Lives Matter is. And that's coming from me as a whole person, African-American, Black man in the great United States, corporate America, with the background that I come from.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I have to say, that's one of the best explanations of Black Lives Matter that I've ever heard. And I happen to be married to a Floridian from Jacksonville who is around your height, a little heftier than you, former Marine. And I have to say, you guys would have a lot to talk about because he's had a very similar experience to you in terms of being pulled over near where we live and things like that. And we live in Weston, just like you. And yeah, you'd be amazed by what goes on in 2020. So I'm curious to know from you guys, since we're talking about how people are reacting to this conversation at work, how do you guys handle this issue of social media? Because social media, as we all know, is everywhere. Everybody has it, everybody does it, everybody has something to say, everybody thinks that all of their thoughts and points and sometimes food are so noteworthy that they have to share it with everybody. So I'm just wondering how you guys deal with an employee's right, obviously, to express their point of view on their own social media, right? But what if they make personal statements that violate your company values? And the employment lawyer in me wants to add, particularly if they are friends with other people at work. Who has thoughts on that? Donna, what about you?
I think Terry was going to start.
Oh, okay, Terry.
Terry.
That was a nice pass, Donna. Sweet.
Oh, no.
Hey, look, For Southern Glazers, look, we're maintaining and upholding our zero tolerance policy for any hate, any harassment, or discriminatory behavior of any kind in our organization. You know, I mentioned a little earlier, but integrity and inclusiveness are part of our family values, and they're not just words. And basically, you know, we're making it clear to our employees that these behaviors, you know, they must be lived every day. And you got to treat everyone with respect, whether it's on social media or whether it's in your daily interactions. And look, the foundation for diversity and inclusion is acknowledging and valuing all of our differences and finding ways for us to, find that common ground that makes us all stronger. And so, you know, for us and from our CEO, Wayne Chaplin, and from our senior leaders like Lee Hager, we recognize that, look, there's simply no room for any expression of hate to reside in our culture and within our Southern Glazers family. And that zero tolerance, unfortunately, but yet fortunately, we've had to uphold that on many events because of this new thing that we have, social media, the many platforms that are out there. We have a very engaged and active communications team that also helps us monitor all things social media.
Excellent. Donna, what about you?
Yeah, actually, absolutely the same as Terry just indicated. And I think for us, the root of this does come down to our ability as employees, not only representing the company, but truly living our values and the tenets of our culture. And those are really the root of who we are. And we want to make sure that employees recognize that they have a responsibility as they are sharing their opinions to continue to live and uphold those values and culture. We do work very closely with our communications team and our legal team and the HR team to make sure that we're helping employees understand what good looks like and continuing to try to uphold that while enabling employees to still have their views. And it is a delicate, difficult balance. But our core anchor becomes our values and our culture, just as Terry indicated.
Margie, do you have anything to add?
No, not really. I mean, I can tell you that it's a very fine balance, as Donna has said, and clearly Terry, we have a partnership between our marketing folks who monitor our social pages that many of our employees actually follow and comment on, our external facing. But, at the end of the day, we have to know who we are, and we know who we are. And if we can't live by that, then that's when some tough decisions have to be made. And there's always an area of risk in making tough decisions. But, when hypothetically, I'll just say that as a disclaimer, if we have an employee that goes on a rant and behaves in such a way that is recorded and that recording is sent to us, we're going to take action because your action, your behavior does not align with who we believe we are. And certainly our mission and our vision. And sometimes we just got to take the risk and make those decisions and support people to leave the organization. So you got to stand for something. And so I'm happy to say that we know who we are.
Well said. Well, I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate each of you saying that your companies are willing to fall back on their core values. I think that's so important. It's one thing to have a mission statement. It's another thing to live by it for sure. So believe it or not, we're at the 15-minute mark. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions because I have one wrap-up question that I'll give you in a few minutes, but I'm going to ask you a couple of questions from the chat. One that I thought was kind of interesting is how do you balance having these conversations? I mean, I know the answer to this, but while not creating discrimination and harassment claims? Who would like to answer that one?
How do you balance the conversation while
How do you balance these conversations while not creating discrimination and harassment claims?
I think it's a dance, and I think, you have to put your HR practitioner hat on and listen very actively, especially if there's if there's, disclosure of behaviors taking place, at the end of the day, we got a job to do and protect, the environment, the culture, and the organization. But creating that safe space for us this far has been welcomed at such an incredible level of just, we wanted that we have not reached kind of that juncture of being, we're not worried about risk and claims. We're focused on, we got to have the conversation. So I don't know if I answered the question, but at least for me here, I'm not worried about a claim coming. I'm worried that we don't have a conversation and behaviors continue, or perceptions continue, or feeling of not belonging continues.
Anyone else on the panel?
Yeah, I would say for us, same. It really comes down to what our values are and what our culture is, and that we want to continue to drive living that. And our opportunity to keep this, all of the issues, programs, practices related to diversity, inclusion, and belonging are going to enable us to drive meaningful change if we continue to live the values that are important to us. And so it's more about sort of going towards the true north of what's right, as opposed to worrying about something that might cause some kind of litigation issue. Again, it is about the power of positive and what it can do for us collectively, and that's where our focus is.
Thank you.
And I'll close with leadership is a contact sport, and having and engaging in these bold conversations, as a lot of us said at the outset of the dialogue, is new or has been approached just a little bit. And now we have to put structure around it. We have to make sure that everyone understands the why. We're engaging with you because we know that we operate within our culture a certain way when you're here for your 8, 12, 10 hours or so. But when you go out to the real world, unfortunately, these other things beget you, and they are a part of your life. And whether you know it or not, unconsciously or consciously, you're bringing that into the workplace. And now it's even more evident in the television and with the climate of all things. And we got to talk about that. And so letting folks know and giving them examples of is important. And you got to take on these bold conversations. And for the leaders, you gotta let our leaders know, look, leadership is a contact sport. If you don't want to be, if you want to play touch or tag, this ain't the game for you to be in a leadership role. And it may not even be the game for you to be a part of our team, because we represent and we live in the communities that all of these topics are relevant, from an understanding, from an education aspect, and just from an awareness aspect. All of us, regardless of our demographics, our backgrounds, our socioeconomic status, the university, colleges or universities we may have attended, or even the schools our kids may attend or may have attended, everything that's ongoing here touches us and reflects on us in some way, shape, or form. And it's imperative that we now approach it with structure, which is what Margie hit on, Donna hit on, and what we have to lead with as HR practitioners as we represent and support our organizations.
I love it. Leadership is a contact sport. I will tell you, there are a lot of leaders who do not know that. So I hope they're hearing it today. So another interesting question that I think is timely. How do you get your employees involved in these DEI conversations, especially if they don't feel like the DEI work is more important than their client work? And I think for some of you, these things are going to be intertwined, but I'd be curious to know what you think about that. So where you have, I'm in a law firm, and clearly, DEI and client work seem like they're worlds apart, but in my opinion, they are intertwined. So I just be wondering, what do you guys think with respect to that? And how would you, for employees who, need to hear the case for DEI, how would you make it in terms of the client base? Anyone?
I think you got to meet people where they're at, and you can't force the conversation. You can't force learning. I think it's imperative for us to create an environment of learning and an environment that's safe. There's always going to be that percentage of employees that that don't value it, don't want to have conversation. But I think that if we create a learning culture, which we do have, that the culture embraces the not so safe topics, such as social injustice and equity, I think that you know, you can bring people along, but they have to be ready, and you can't force that.
Agreed.
And I would also add to that, completely agree, Margie. And I think when I also step back and think about our clients and our customers, they're human beings also. They're diverse. It matters in their organizations. It matters to them. And our understanding within our own organization helps us expand our knowledge and understanding of the clients that we're working with. They're part of our ecosystem, just like our selling partners, just like our communities. And so I think if we approach it from a holistic perspective, we see that these topics are conversations that are happening in our client organizations just as much as they're happening in ours. They're happening around our dinner tables, they're happening out in our communities. So I think the work that we do internally becomes a great example of how we partner even better with our customers and clients, and it becomes symbiotic work.
Yeah, and I'll share. Look, I agree with all points said. Here's how we approached it. We put out a program called D&I Idea Distillery to our employees on how we could improve, get better, be more aware, enhance, be more knowledgeable around all things D&I. And to our surprise, we had over 520 submissions from our over 20,000 employee workforce. We narrowed it down to 11. We selected a winner last week. There'll be a press release that'll go out to all of you here before this week is out. And I share that is because to the point that was made by Margie and Donna, employees do want to get involved. And Erika, I think it's a great tee up for us. We may think our employees may not want to get involved, and there may be a minority, and I mean a very small minority, but in reality, they want to get involved, and they've kind of just been waiting. Hey, ask us what we're thinking, ask us and watch, and that's what we've learned here at Southern Glazers. And so our diversity and inclusion idea distillery, we are just super excited. I say that on behalf of our senior leadership team to share the winners and some of the project ideas that came through that we will be implementing here over a period of time as a result of soliciting and hearing from our employees on how we can approach this topic, this very sensitive topic and real topic that we're all gathered here for today.
Excellent. So I think that you guys have done an excellent job of really sharing some great insights into what your companies are doing, what you personally are doing to help leadership deal with these issues. But I'd like to know, just before we wrap up here, if there's any other best practices or anything you'd like to share with the audience and kind of what the future looks like for D&I in your organizations. Margie, how about you?
I'm hoping that the future brings that we're not segmenting this conversation, that we're not just exclusively, talking about, diversity and inclusion, that it just becomes part of our fabric, that when we create coursework, when we create patient protocols, evidence-based medicine, when we think about our external facing consumers, that when we recruit, that when we talk about employee retention, that it's just a natural part of the thinking, the methodology, the strategy, that we don't have to remember, oh, don't forget, we got to talk about diversity and inclusion. That is just part of what we do every day. That's what I see. And I know I could be a Pollyanna and I'm a perpetual optimist, but that's what I will see as success.
Excellent.
I couldn't agree more. I remember early on in my tenure at Citrix, someone asked me a question very similar, and my answer really, Margie, was the same, is that I would love for it to be just a core skill that we do on a daily basis in everything that we do, that it is part of all of our programs and practices. It is embedded. We don't even think about it anymore because it's just a natural part of how we act. And I think that's why this can't be an event. We have to make sure that this continues to be a journey for all of us. It is about people first. It is about the fact that people matter, and not only making our organization stronger, but our communities stronger, because it's through our communities that they become part of our employers, and we interchange systemically, with our customers as well. So it is about making all of us stronger and enabling it to be part of who we are going forward. But couldn't agree more, Margie.
Oh yeah, so that makes it 3 in agreement. Look, our future looks bright, and we'll continue to be stronger and better as a result of having these conversations. And look, I like to close with how we began when listening with Johnny. Look, these are hot topics. These are hot conversations. You got to bring your whole self. You got to recognize the humility that it takes, the openness that's required, and the transparency in the disclosure aspect of it as we talk about all things here: diversity, equity, inclusion, and let's not forget the belonging. And look, we got, my kids I say our kids. Ooh, Denise will get me. Our kids play sports all their life. From soccer to rugby, or we have one playing rugby now at the Naval Academy. And one thing that they said a couple of weeks ago, the Army-Navy game in rugby, is, hey, look, Arnold, go out, this to my son, go out and make sure you check that man, you check that wing to wing the entire game, because that's their score. You don't want him getting any force. And I say that to us as the HR community, we got to check ourselves, and we can't be afraid to check our leaders that we support as well. And so that self-check has to occur within us as HR practitioners, as Margie so eloquently said, and then we got to make sure that we're doing the same with our leaders, because we don't want it, as Donna emphasized, to become just a moment or a freaking transaction. This has to be a part of the fabric, their DNA, those leadership essentials, and so we all own that. And my ask of all of us, with my big thank you, is let's continue to check the heck out of each other so that we can keep this as a part of our fabric.
Well, I think that is a perfect place for us to end. I want to thank you guys so much. You are all such bringing such value to your organizations, and we appreciate you sharing your insights. For the people who asked, we'll send around a list of the books and the resources that were mentioned. And I want to say, on a personal note, it has been a huge pleasure for me to facilitate this conversation, a huge pleasure to do the last one. This is my last one because I will be leaving the firm next month. And so this was a great way to go out. And I very much appreciate all of you spending your time and being with us today. I hope it was helpful. I hope you learned a lot. And we are right on time. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody. And I'm going to step in on behalf of Bottom Line Partners and thank Erika for an extraordinary job, again, moderating to a high level of excellence. You couldn't have done a better job. To our friends in the HR community, Margie, Donna, and Terry, we salute you. You are leading the courageous conversations, the daring dialogues, as Donna called them. And I can't tell you how many times I got goosebumps and how many times literally I had tears in my eyes because somebody said something so amazing and so on point.